Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop.
Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We're really happy that you could join us today, and we're really excited to be talking to you about how you can vet an IT support provider. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO at Community IT.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Longenecker. I'm the Director of IT Consulting at Community IT. I've been at Community IT for 17 years.
So before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is, as I mentioned before, a 100% employee-owned company, and we exist to help nonprofits use technology effectively. Our goal is to advance the missions of our customers through the effective use of technology. We have about 40 staff. We're based in Washington, D.C. We serve nonprofits throughout the country, and we're consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and that's an honor that we received again in 2021. It's important to find out about their on-site support capabilities. So specifically, I think the questions you want to ask there are how long it takes for them to send someone on site. So what's the turnaround from an issue being submitted to how quickly someone can get on site to support the issue. In some cases, you may want to have an on-site support schedule where you are arranging for the same person to be at your office on a regular basis. So you want to check and see if they have the capability of supporting that. And then also, what's the technical level of the person that's going to be going on site? Are they entry level? Are they an engineer? Just find out a little bit more about the criteria by which they determine whether or not an issue needs to be dispatched. Any other thoughts on that one, Steve?
No, I think I also want, we have our 12 questions. We got to keep this moving. But yeah, I think you've got it. That's right. You want to know who's coming. Yep.
So the next question I want to ask is staff tenure. How long, what's the retention rate of the organization? What's the average tenure of staff? What's the tenure of the leadership? Obviously, the longer staff have been at the organization, the better it is in terms of, being a good place for people to work, but also, the retention of knowledge, the degree to which staff know the customers and their networks and their IT systems is also something that's important. And that can be hard to maintain if the organization has a lot of turnover.
We love this slide because we have a long history of good tenure at Community IT. So it's a little self-serving, but I definitely do think it matters, and we definitely hear from clients who come to us saying, "Yeah, I liked my MSP a lot, my former MSP a lot, and then so and so left, and the service was never the same after that. I loved so and so, and then they left." And obviously, we don't have perfect retention. It's impossible in this day and age. There's all sorts of reasons that people come and go from organizations. But if you're interviewing MSPs and one of them has staff that stay on for a long time, you're more likely to whatever they're doing now, they're probably going to be able to keep doing into the future. And if it's just a constant cycling of staff, then they better have really, really great systems in place to make up for that constant turnover, because there's not going to be any institutional knowledge maintained within the staff themselves. it can probably still work, but it's a disadvantage.
Yeah. So you also should ask about pricing, and it's not just a question of how much, what the actual price is, although that is important, and obviously you need to compare pricing between different providers. But you also want to, more importantly, find out how they charge for the different services that they offer. And I think this can be a really frustrating question for those of you who are evaluating MSPs. This can be a difficult question to ask because, unfortunately, for better or for worse, our industry is very non-standard in terms of how things are priced. And you could get 5 different proposals from 5 different MSPs that are priced in 5 completely different ways. The line items could be all completely different. The price points might be all over the place. So it can be very challenging to evaluate MSPs on price. And I think the best thing that you can do is just ask them to explain, what does all of this mean? I've seen invoices from a lot of different MSPs that even I, with a technical background, had difficulty understanding what the different line items referred to, what they meant. So I think excessive amounts of technical jargon in pricing is a warning sign. The inability of a potential MSP to connect the dots for you between what the pricing is and what the different service offerings are to what you need in terms of IT support, they can't connect those dots, that's a warning sign. At the end of the day, you should understand what the pricing is covering, how it works, and the services that it refers to. So don't just look at the number, look at how, the different factors that create that final number, and make sure that the potential MSP is explaining to you how that number got calculated.
Yeah, my 2 cents on this aren't necessarily all that helpful, because I think I'm mostly going to echo the fact that it's a real challenge for the people doing the evaluations because of how different everything is. I guess some wisdom to offer is, the bottom line that you see in a proposal is because of how different things are structured in terms of how pricing is done. You can't always, the total cost of ownership of IT can be different than what you see in a proposal. Cheaper is not always better. So another thing to sort of look for is places where the pricing sets up an incentive structure where you're going to possibly have a better IT experience. So you may be paying, a fixed price per month, but you know that the MSP is incented to not have problems for the staff. Whereas if you are paying for something that's more of a, not necessarily break fix, but where you're charged hourly for every little thing that the MSP does, that model can work, absolutely, but that, the incentive structures on that are a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. What are the incentives around the pricing model, and how might that influence how the MSP provides support? All right, so the 6th question. So we're halfway there, but we'll definitely finish on time. Ask them about their onboarding process. How do they handle onboarding? And I think this is something that we take very seriously, and we have a very intensive and well-defined onboarding process, but we're reviewing it every quarter, and we always feel like, wow, we need to be even more intentional about it, even more focused on it. It's just amazing to us how critical the onboarding process is. Who's in charge of onboarding? What are the steps that the MSP goes through to onboard you? How intentional and deliberate does it feel? I think our experience has been that, the first quarter, the first 3 months of working with a new customer, are the most important in some ways. Like they sort of set the tone for the rest of the year, and in some cases the rest of the engagement. And if they don't go well, it just getting off to a rocky start can create long-term problems. So it's something that the MSP should really be intentional and focused on, and they should give you a really clear understanding of what it's going to look like and tell you what they're going to do during the process. Are they going to evaluate the network? Are they going to evaluate your IT systems? What kind of documentation are they going to be creating? Are they going to be providing that documentation to you? How do they prepare themselves for supporting your staff? What are the steps that they go through to transition management of your IT systems from your current provider or your current manager? What's included in the onboarding process? Do they bill you on an hourly rate basis for it? Is it included as part of the standard pricing? So I think it's really important to think of onboarding as its own unique and critical activity within the larger context of working with a managed services provider. And they should really be confident and deliberative in terms of how they approach onboarding, and should be able to communicate that to you when you ask them.
You want to know what the impact on your staff is going to be, how much time is required from them, but also from the primary contact on your staff. So obviously there's going to be one person, whether it's you or someone on your staff, who's going to be doing a lot of sort of product management and interfacing. If you are transitioning from one MSP to another, oftentimes that person is the person who has to sort of mediate that relationship between the outgoing MSP and the incoming MSP. So that's going to take some time from that particular staff person. So what are their responsibilities and expectations going to be through this process? If you're starting with specific pain points, are those going to be are those addressed during onboarding, or if not, like, is there a roadmap coming out of the onboarding process for addressing those pain points? These are all the sorts of additional sort of wrinkles that you can add to this question.
Yeah. This is a little bit of a general question. How will you work with us? But I think it's good to ask it in that way, or what you're trying to get a feel for is what their style is, what's their approach, because different MSPs have different approaches. Our approach at Community IT is very collaborative, and that works great for a lot of organizations, but it's not the best fit for every organization. There are organizations out there that just want someone to come in and sort of tell them what to do, or need someone to be more sort of command and control in their approach to providing support. And so you want to have an understanding of, are you going to meet with us on a regular basis, or is that not part of your process? What sorts of decisions are you going to expect us to make? How involved and informed do we need to be in keeping the IT, running? There are some people who say, I don't want to know anything about IT, I just want it to work. And there are managed services providers who work well, with that approach. So just finding out a little bit more about their style and how they work is an important part of the evaluation process.
Some of the specific areas, I mean, Johan alluded to them, but generally you need you need a line item for IT in your annual budget, and will the MSP work with you on that? Planning, how is that handled? Let's see, what else do we? Projects are sort of another area of like, it's not the day-to-day, but when we do need to do something different, how does that work in terms of working with us? Yeah. Help desk is one aspect of how an MSP works with a customer, and you want to explore the other areas as well.
Related to that, you want to ask them what sort of reporting and accountability do they provide? So are they providing regular reports on how they're doing? We provide our customers with a monthly report that provides them with an inventory of their endpoints, of their computers that are being managed, whether or not the patching is up to date, whether or not the antivirus is up to date, a report on the number of tickets that have been submitted, the number of times that their staff have called our help desk, how long they had to wait, whether or not we met the service level agreement for all of the calls and tickets that were submitted in a given month. So MSP should be tracking all of this, all these performance metrics, and they should be providing them back to you as the customer on a regular basis, so that you have insight into how they're performing, and you can base it on actual metrics and quantitative results, and not just sort of a qualitative feel of, well, I feel like things are going well, or I don't know, I feel like things aren't going well. So it's important that the MSP have a reporting and accountability process where they're providing you with the information you need to hold them accountable for their services.
I would say, and we started with that poll, Johan, and that we have 25% of our audience that's 10 or less. And I do think perhaps for the very small organizations, it's possible that such organizations might be working with a very small MSP. And if the scale gets to a small enough point, this reporting and accountability, I think it's really important that we, as a sort of a larger MSP, have the reporting and accountability systems in place that we have, and they're automated, because otherwise we just couldn't deliver. But I can see how a 5-person organization, the number of tickets, it's at a human enough scale that the organization kind of knows already where things are and how things lie, and you can just pick up the phone and talk to someone and say, hey, it can be a little bit more qualitative than this slide suggests. And so I think there's a little bit of a scale issue with this one. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that it definitely, you need this if once you get above like 25 seats, how do you know exactly how this MSP is doing? There should hopefully be some automated reporting coming out.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I want to ask the MSP what vendors and technologies do they support and do they work with? So do they have a preferred vendor for computer equipment that they work with, just to get a sense, for what they support and what sorts of systems that they use. And they should be able to provide you with this information pretty easily. Hopefully is included in the proposal. Just so you know, like what software they're going to be using to manage and maintain your systems, and if there are any specific vendors that they have partnerships with or that they have certifications with. It's a good opportunity to just get a better sense of how they run their business.
And how much change it requires from you. Some MSPs have they gain efficiencies, and it's not a bad thing, but they gain their efficiencies by having their customers be very standardized, and that can be fine, and they can sometimes bring their pricing down because all of their client portfolios are sort of the same, but that might require changes from you. Okay, you have to use Lenovo computers, or you have to use Dell computers. That's the only way we do this, or whatever. So being aware of that. And then I think there's a small risk here that's also built into this slide that sort of provides something just to watch for. And I'm not so much talking about like what antivirus does the MSP use. That's a good question to ask, and they should know. But I'm not asking our audience members to sort of know, which antivirus is really good and if this MSP is using a really good one or not. Like that's a hard question to answer. You can Google that, and there's like a million different opinions about antivirus, and it's not even, antivirus isn't even what we're talking about anymore. It's more advanced systems. But I do think sometimes we have seen MSPs that have sort of locked customers in. This doesn't happen nearly as often as it used to, but if the MSP is like, oh yeah, we build the computers for you, you buy the computers from us, and they're like in white boxes, that we've built. That doesn't happen. I haven't seen that for years, but that's an example of where if you leave the MSP, then the people who built all your computers are gone, and suddenly if anything breaks, there's like not really any accountability on fixing it. Whereas if you bought your computers from Dell or HP or whatever, there's a major manufacturer who supposedly is responsible for that equipment, up to the life cycle of the equipment and the warranty and so on. So you do want your MSP to sort of be in the mainstream, I think, or else you run the risk of sort of being locked into that MSP.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to check on. And you're right, I think it's less common now, but it certainly still happens. We definitely ask the MSP about cybersecurity. That's something that has become more and more important over the last few years as the threat landscape continues to evolve, and in some ways get worse. I think we're all pretty well aware at this point of cybercrime and just how common and prevalent it is. Things like fraud, account compromise, ransomware. So you want to make sure that they've built into their service offering cybersecurity protections, that they have experience with meeting the cybersecurity needs of your type of organization. And I would ask them, have you responded to any incidents? What sort of incidents have your customers experienced? How do you recommend that we prepare for cybersecurity? Do they have any specific cybersecurity services that they might offer? I do think, one word of caution, there's been a bit of a land rush over the last few years among MSPs to provide expensive cybersecurity solutions, oftentimes ones that aren't always needed. So, it's easy to look at the headlines and get frightened and say, well, I really need to invest in a lot of cybersecurity protection to protect myself. But I think it's really important to look at the specific risks your organization is facing. And ideally, the MSP would be able to discuss that with you and help you identify your specific risks and put in protections that are appropriate for you. So, for example, like I'm the CEO of a very small company. I'm not going to go out and hire a bodyguard. I'm not. Yes, CEOs of companies get kidnapped, but they're much larger companies and more prominent CEOs. It would be silly for me to hire a bodyguard, and it would be a waste of money. But oftentimes, cybersecurity services will get oversold, and to protect you from things that you're not really at risk of experiencing. So it's just important to make sure that that the MSP does cybersecurity, but that they also do it in an appropriate and responsible way. Anything to add, Steve? You think I should get the bodyguard?
I'd love to. Yeah, it'd be great if you had a bodyguard. That would be fabulous. Yeah, I think this is a tough one for people because I think that it's hard to evaluate if you don't have a familiarity with the landscape already, because there's a lot of sweet talking salespeople who talk a good game, and I know from our side that there's a million products aimed at us for us to sell to our customers, and it's not that none of them are valuable or that all of them are valueless. That's absolutely not the case. There's no way we would do a good job with cybersecurity without some products that we're using with our customers. So I'm not telling you to beware of packages. I'm just saying it is a tough situation. So you're just gonna have to get a feel for what they tell you and whether it sounds like it makes sense. And I guess, compare what you're hearing. Don't just talk to one MSP, but talk to a number of them, and ask them all about cybersecurity. And if there's one outlier that sounds really crazy, that's probably a warning sign. But if they're all sort of telling you the same thing, that's a good sign that they're all sort of in the same, that they're in the mainstream and they're thinking about things similarly is a good sign. There's a lot of, and we have lots of opinions about this, but there's a lot of basic things that everyone sort of agrees that you can do, and if and any MSP should be encouraging you to do those things to improve your security posture.
Two more questions to ask. One is on strategic planning. Do they support strategic technology planning? Are they, can they think strategically with you? MSP is not going to, be a strategic planner. They're not a management consultant, but they should be able to understand, strategic planning and business planning, and they should be able to help develop an IT roadmap that corresponds to your sort of strategic plan as an organization. We have one more poll, but I think we're going to skip it just in the interest of time. The 12th question is delivering value. I think it's helpful to just ask them, well, how do you deliver value? It's a great interview question when evaluating an MSP, just to kind of hear their thought process. How do they, what's their thinking about the value that they provide to the organizations that they support? All right, so just in closing, hopefully we hit on these learning objectives today. You have a better understanding of what an MSP is, why you need an MSP, and how to find and select an MSP. And we have a few minutes left, so we do want to open the floor up to any questions.
Great. Our first question comes from Carrie. They're asking, do you have any suggestions for ease of transition from one MSP to another? I'm concerned about the transfer of knowledge from one IT professional to another, rather than me, the operations director, trying to explain how our systems work.
Yeah, that's a great question. And a challenge that we run into pretty regularly. I think, ideally, the MSP that you're leaving is going to deal with it professionally, and it's pretty standard in our industry for the arriving MSP to meet with the departing MSP, and for them to sort of run through, for the departing MSP to provide an overview of the network. You can ask them to put together network documentation. They should be doing that anyways. That's something that you have a right to as their customer. And once you have that, that can be provided to the next MSP. Ideally, that may be information that I would maybe request that on a regular basis, just to have that information on hand. And that information is actually very helpful when you go to select a new MSP, because when you put together an RFP or just sort of an informal selection process, the MSPs that you're evaluating are going to want to know about your system, about your information systems and your network. And so if you have that information already, you can communicate that to them. So in the worst case scenarios where you have a really obstinate MSP that's not being very helpful, the incoming MSP can generally figure everything out. So we've never encountered a situation, even with the worst handoffs you can imagine, we've never encountered a situation where it's been, we haven't been able to ultimately onboard the customer. So it's always possible. It can be a little more painful in those situations, but I think getting as much information from your existing MSP on a regular basis as possible is a good starting point. What are your thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, I echo that. It's a pain point for us sometimes when we're onboarding someone and we're having difficulty with the MSP that's being transitioned off of. Not always, of course. There's a lot of, but it can be. Some of the other places where it can be challenging is just in the sort of the centralized services tool sets. Sometimes they don't play well together, and so you need to sort of plan. The professionals on both sides need to plan together on how to transition the monitoring and management agent from one system and platform to the other in a way that's efficient and doesn't require necessarily a tremendous amount of end user interactions. I'd say maybe another piece of advice to offer is just to sort of to plan and expect to pay the departing MSP overlap those things, maybe somewhat the way, when it's much easier if you're moving from one apartment to another if you have a residency in both apartments for a month, instead of trying to do it all. And I'm no longer allowed here, and now I'm only allowed there, and I have to sort of be in that transition's a lot easier if you can go back and forth, because you're paying for both for a month. It's obvious, but plan on it.
Great, thank you. And the person asking that question also says, good to hear that is standard practice for both MSPs to communicate during on and offboarding. Thank you. We are just about at time. And thank you so much, Johan and Steve. Thank you so much for being such a great audience and participating. And again, thank you, Johan and Steve, for educating our community.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Tori.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.